Good evening. Members of the public are encouraged to participate in meetings by, one, accessing the webcast. I'm missing a page. Huh? I'm good? Good. One, accessing the webcast at the URL https://city-clovis.com/government/city-council-city-council-agenda/. 2, providing written comments at same website. 3, participating by phone, or 4, coming to the city council meeting in person. We are practicing social distancing and can only accommodate a maximum of 16 people at one time. Did I read the wrong one?
No, you're okay. We have actually changed our process, and we'll talk about it a little bit more on item number 10. Okay. But we're open to the public, and we're good to go.
Okay. So this time I'll call the meeting to order. The flag salute will be led by Councilmember Whalen. Join me in pledging allegiance to our flag and to our republic. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Councilmember Ashbeck?
Here.
Councilmember Bessinger? Here. Councilmember Mwanatua is absent this evening. Councilmember Whalen? Here. Mayor Flores?
I'm here. Next item of business, public comments. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the City Council on any matter within the City Council's jurisdiction that is not listed on the agenda. In order for everyone to be heard, please limit your comments to 5 minutes or less, or 10 minutes per topic. Anyone wishing to be placed on the agenda for a specific topic should contact the city manager's office and submit correspondence at least 10 days before the desired date of appearance. Anyone in the public wishing to be heard today, public comments? Anyone here in the chamber? Nope. Okay, how about on the web?
There are none.
And
we did not receive
We have no correspondence. Okay, we'll move on. Ordinances and resolutions. With respect to the approval of resolutions and ordinances, the reading of the title shall be deemed a motion to waive a reading of the complete resolution or ordinance, and unless there is a request by a council member that the resolution or ordinance be read in full, further reading of the resolution or ordinance shall be deemed waived by unanimous consent of the council. Next item, consent calendar. Items considered routine in nature are to be placed upon the consent calendar. They will all be considered and voted upon in one vote as one item unless a council member requests individual consideration. A council member's vote in favor of the consent calendar is considered and recorded as a separate affirmative vote in favor of each action listed. Motions in favor of adoption of the consent calendar are deemed to include a motion to waive the reading of any ordinance or resolution of the consent calendar. For adoption of ordinances, only those that have received a unanimous vote upon introduction are considered consent calendar items. Today we have 6 items on our consent calendar. Any council member wishing to pull any of the items on our consent calendar? Nope. Anyone here in the chambers wishing to pull an item from our consent calendar? I see none. Anyone from the web audience?
None.
And
No.
okay, so with that, I'll bring back to council. What is your?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying for approval of the consent calendar, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the motion carries, 4 and 1 absence. Next items will be public hearings. We have number 7, consider action related to the annexation of territory, annexation number 69, track map 6339, northwest corner of Locan and Teague, track map 6332, northeast corner Locan and Teague, future phase, northeast corner Locan and Teague, to the City of Clovis Community Facilities District number 2004-1, Police and Fire Service. A, consider, will we do this in order or, yeah, so we'll read it out as we do these, right? Okay. So go ahead with, okay, so it's my turn. In order to, this is the time and place for the public hearing of this council proceedings for Community Facilities District number 2004-1. The hearing is to acquire annexation number 69 into the district and to levy a special taxes in annexation number 69. Before I formally open the hearing, is there anyone who wishes to file a written protest? If so, they must be filled with the city clerk now. The city clerk is Mr. John Holt, that's seated to my right. Any protests? I see none. The hearing is now open. We will first have presentations by staff about annexation number 69. After that, we will receive comments and questions and any oral protests from any interested person. When all comments have been received, the hearing will be closed. And our presenter today will be Gina.
On May 17th, 2021, the council heard a request by the affected property owners to include territory at T6339, northwest corner Locan and Teague, T6332, northeast corner Locan and Teague, a future phase, northeast corner Locan and Teague, and as indicated in the detailed map, and identified as CFD annexation number 69 to City CFD 2004-1. Tonight's actions will finalize the annexation process by holding a public hearing and property owner election.
Okay. I'm sorry, my computer is giving me some. Do we have any comments or questions or protests from the audience? No? How about the web?
None.
And we received none?
Correct, none.
Okay. At this time, we'll close the hearing. We may now consider and adopt the resolution annexing territory annexation number 69 to Community Facilities District 2004-1, which will annex territory described in the boundary maps to the district and call a special property owners election, which will call for the property owner vote to approve the special tax and the appropriate limit for annexation number 69.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 The motion passes with one absent. Will the clerk please announce the results of the property owner's vote?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm in receipt of one ballot representing 36 votes, all in favor, indicating unanimous passage.
Okay. The record shows that the property owner's votes are unanimous and in favor of the levy of the special tax and the establishment of the appropriate limits. We may now proceed with the final actions of the district.
I'll make a motion declaring the results of the special landowner election, directing the recording of the notice of special tax lien for the City of Clovis Community Facilities District number 2004-1.
Second.
In this second, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The motion is 4 with one absence, 4 ayes and 1 absence, and so the motion carries. And that concludes this item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Next item is number 8. that? Okay. Number 8, consider approval of resolution authorizing approval of the application and adopting permanent local housing allocation plan for the permanent local housing allocation program and approving commitment of funds to the Jefferson Affordable Housing Project located at 1703 North DeWolf Avenue. And Andy Hauser is our president.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Tonight, we will be seeking approval to submit a resolution for the permanent local housing allocation program and seeking approval to commit funds to the Jefferson, an affordable housing project at 1703 North DeWolf. The permanent local housing allocation program is a state program that was funded by SB2 in 2017. It is funded with a statewide recordation fee. That fee is on every property and then is allocated to cities. The focus is to provide funding for a variety of affordable housing projects. It has to be to households that earn 120% or less of area median income, but the focus is really on 60% or less, which is about half of the 120% line there in the chart. The program is a formula-based, non-competitive allocation. We just need to submit an application that meets the requirements. The anticipated revenue to the city is over a 5-year period, 2019 to 2023, is $2.19 million, and 5% can be used for administration. The amount does vary based on the recordations that occur in the market, so it is variable, but the state has provided us actuals for 2019 and 2020, and estimates going forward. Those can go up or down. At the end of 5 years, we'll get a new round of allocation monies to allocate and provide a plan for. So we can spend this money on the following categories: multifamily developments, rental assistance, homeless services, first-time homebuyer assistance, and housing rehabilitation. There's quite a few subcategories amongst these, but for simplicity, that's the major categories we can use the money on. So staff has reviewed the NOFA from the state and the program parameters, and we are recommending that we be authorized to submit an application that would invest in affordable housing multifamily development. This would be required to be a loan to the developer, so as time goes on, if repayments do occur, money would come back into the program to build the program over time. It would leverage significant funds at a state and federal level by matching with state and federal tax credits, and it fills a gap in the community. We have been able and successful to bring in money for first-time homebuyer, for home rehabilitation, for homeless housing, such as the Butterfly Gardens project, but we do have a gap in multifamily financing right now. But we can amend this plan annually going forward if a need arises that we don't see right now. So that is an option that can come back. So staff would recommend to approve the 5-year plan and application submittal. So that is one of the items before you. The second is the commitment of those funds we just discussed, the first 3 years, to the Jefferson, a project at 1703 North DeWolf Avenue. It's 58 affordable units and affordable to 60% of AMI, so it does target the target number for the PLHA. The request is for a $1.28 million loan. This is a residual receipts loan as required by the state, which means the city would be in last place financing with minimal interest charged. The total development budget is $26.7 million, so you can see the amount of leverage that we are pursuing with this investment. Staff has completed a full financial review of the project and has been working with the Affordable Housing Development Corporation, which is in the room tonight. Affordable Housing Development Corporation has over 5,000 units under control, many of them affordable. They are located in Clovis. They are a local developer, and they own and operate 2 or 3 projects in Clovis itself, have a long track record here. Proposed site plan is on this slide. The project is located in our Loma Vista Urban Center. The plan has always called for this level of density and type of development to occur on the site. There at the red circle on the map. It's an approved use, and we're not here to talk about the entitlements tonight. That's a by right use. So this project, the reason my staff is recommending it is that it's positioned to compete well for funding at the state tax credit level. There's a unique funding opportunity right now with extra tax credits coming into our county due to the natural disaster of the Creek Fire this last year. The deadline is July 1st, 2021 to get an application in, so we are trying to petition to leverage those funds as best as possible. The loan, if the project is awarded funds, would need council approval in the future to come back to get approved. And then we would also be coming back with future allocations and how we would like to allocate those to projects going forward. So probably sometime in this next year, we'll come back with parameters and basically a program set up for council to consider in a public forum. So staff recommends to approve the commitment of funds letter. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I am available.
Questions for Andy?
I do have a question. Can you remind me on a by right project like this, still subject to design standards for the Loma Vista area, director review? I mean, all of that occurs, because this doesn't exactly look like the southeast area, so I didn't know if this is it, or this is just an idea, or how that process goes from here.
Yeah, so we've been working with the developer. The design guidelines for Loma Vista apply, and they're highly aware of them. They are designing a project that would meet those design requirements. Those are reviewed at the staff level by our planners and engineers to make sure it complies.
Okay, thanks.
My question, for Loma Vista.
Yeah, that's not the best rendering, so that's what I had at my disposal.
More questions? Okay, I'll open it to the public. Anyone from the public wishing to comment on this item? Come to the podium, please. What's your name?
Good evening, Council. My name is Austin Herzog. I'm with Affordable Housing Development Corporation. I want to thank you for your time and consideration tonight. I also want to thank the City of Clovis over the years for collaboration with our development company in producing affordable housing for over 20 years in the City of Clovis. This would be our 5th development within the city limits, including converting the old Clovis Community Hospital to affordable seniors project that we still own and operate today. We just put this land in escrow very recently. The architect on this project is Mogavero Notstein and Associates out of Sacramento. They're a very well-known, highly respectable architectural firm. We will be working closely with the City of Clovis. The architect has been down in the heart of the City of Clovis, understands the City of Clovis mentality. He's designed communities for us all over the state. So I just want to assure you that we'll be working really closely with the city and being sure that the ultimate product that's delivered adheres to those standards and has unique character. We pride ourselves on building quality, affordable housing. Many of the communities we own and operate today, you would never know them being affordable just driving by. So I just want to let you know that I'm here to answer any questions that you have. We're very excited to try to garner some of the resources that are available as a result of the Creek Fire and bring those resources to the City of Clovis. We'll be applying for $22 million in federal and state tax credits. That's just a great resource in times of rising construction costs and other financing situations. It's imperative that we do have some community involvement and community funding. As Andy mentioned, it does help with the tiebreakers and to leverage up those other public funds that are available at the state and federal level. We're currently under construction on a $50 million affordable housing project in Chico, California, utilizing federal disaster credits from the fires in Northern California, as well as another 56-unit project in Nevada City in California, utilizing disaster relief credits. So we're very adept at this type of financing. The application round is just right upon us in the next few weeks. So we hope it can pass here tonight, and that we can bring this much-needed housing to the City of Clovis. As you know, rents are going up quickly, and affordability is becoming more and more of an issue for working families in the city. So I appreciate your support, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Questions from Mr. Herzog? Bob?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for bringing this project to our attention, Mr. Herzog. As you know, this is an area that has been of some concern to the City of Clovis. We want to increase the amount of affordable housing that we have available in our community. We want to make sure that when we do that, though, we're not compromising our standards, and I think that your presentation, at least verbally, has indicated to us that you're aware of those standards and that you intend to put forward a good project for the citizens of the city of Clovis and future citizens of the city of Clovis. You've heard some comments related to the way that project looks in relationship to the Loma Vista, and that perhaps this may not be the best rendering. When I look at this particular rendering, I'm sure he is a very fine architect, but one thing we're really trying to get away from is some of the old projects type look. And while I see in the center, it looks like you've got some type of a gathering spot in that particular rendering. When I look at the other ones, they do look a little bit more like the old projects that folks used to live in. And so that's a little bit concerning to me personally. And I was wondering if perhaps maybe you could provide some words of comfort related to how this is going to actually be consistent with the Loma Vista area, and how I am wrong in my viewpoint related to how this looks like an old government project of the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a black and white rendering. So that these buildings and community center were pulled from a recent project that Mogavero designed in Chico, California, and it's in the Merriam Park Master Development, and the city of Chico. This project sits along a creek bed in a very environmentally sensitive area within the city of Chico, and they're actually very, very beautiful buildings. In order to meet the timeline that we had, this by right development parcel, we utilized those buildings basically to figure out how many units, and this is just merely a massing practice to figure out how many units we could fit on this, and that's the site plan that you see there. So Andy, which street view was that from? So you were looking at the end of those two buildings there along DeWolf, and so that was kind of a straight-on view that you would be, only looking at if you were perfectly perpendicular to those two buildings. And in those renderings, it looked like it was just basically siding. So we'll break up the exterior of the building with many different textures and colors, roof lines, etc. And the architect is very adept at being able to change and modify, what those elevations can look like from that perspective. Perhaps we could look at tilting the buildings a little bit so they're not so straight onto the street. But there will be a large open space. There will be a large community center for residents' enjoyment and use. And then those rear buildings are obviously masked a little bit differently. But it is a small parcel, and we do need to achieve certain densities. So that is why you see that 3-story component, because it's important that we get that type of density on that parcel. I believe it's just shy of 3 acres, I believe. Yeah. So in order to fit the parking and the number of units, we will have to be building 3 stories there on that site.
Thank you for explaining that, and I am interested in the different textures and different colors that can be utilized, and perhaps maybe positioning as you kind of work through what this is eventually going to look like. And I understand that there's an urgency to this particular request related to the deadlines that are associated with funds that are presently available.
Yes.
Another thing that we've focused on in the city of Clovis when we have affordable housing is we're not just building buildings, we are trying to build community within those affordable housing projects that we have. And if you can maybe address for us what, if any, wraparound services will be provided to the citizens who are going to be living in the buildings at this location.
Yeah, so this is not a fully supportive housing, so you won't see necessarily maybe wraparound services like you would in a transitional type housing or a homeless transitional housing. So the people that will be living here are all employed. We do full criminal background checks and credit checks on all of our residents. There are social services that are provided, which are mandated by the State Tax Credit Allocation Committee, and those social services are provided by local nonprofit partners. We will have a nonprofit partner in this community. In all of our affordable housing communities, depending whether it's seniors or family product, some of those social services would be after-school programs, literacy programs, assistance in writing job applications, credit workshops. There's a myriad of social services that we have the option to provide, and then those are also audited on an annual basis by the State Tax Credit Allocation Committee. So we are very adept at providing those social services, but they're not maybe as intense as one would suspect on like a transitional type housing. These are stable working families, but they're just, they might make $40,000 a year, and when rent's $2,200 a month for a nice 2 or 3 bedroom, that's hard to muster. So this housing it's workforce housing, and we're targeting down to 30% area median income, and we will be providing social services for the full compliance period under the tax credit program.
One of the most important components to, I think, some of the services that people expect when they come to live in the city of Clovis, regardless of whether they're in an affordable housing project or, some of the larger lots that are available in the city of Clovis, is related to the education that a person can receive when they live in the city of Clovis. Have you made any attempts yet, or have you reached out to the Clovis Unified School District to assist with some of the after-school programs that you've talked about as part of this project?
No, we haven't yet. We really just found out that the federal disaster credits were going to be allocated to Fresno County about 6 weeks ago. We've been working with the landowner. This is a very fresh project to us, so we haven't had a chance to reach out directly to Clovis Unified. That's something we're definitely willing to do. We also haven't had a chance to have any neighborhood meetings, but that's something that we practice with all of our developments. So we will be inviting the neighborhood to a convenient location. We'll be working with city staff, and we'll be opening up to having some neighborhood interaction there as well to address any concerns that any neighbors might have.
I appreciate your willingness to reach out to Clovis Unified. I'd really like to see that you do that. Along I guess it's going to be the eastern border of this project runs a canal.
Correct.
And you've mentioned the one up in Chico is also next to at least a waterway of some kind.
Yeah.
Has there been any, at these early stages, either by you or conversations with planning staff related to whether there was going to be any accessibility to that canal, either in the form of a trail or something else?
Yeah, so we worked with Umambi and Horn Engineering, who I believe did all of the engineering work along that trail a little bit farther to the northeast, along that single-family neighborhood. We will be undergrounding the canal along our property line. I believe it's the Jefferson Canal. We named it the Jefferson to pay tribute there to some of that local history. So the trail, in conversation with city engineering, we have met with all of the city departments, including having our engineers and design consultants all on the phone, I believe on several conversations already. So we will be meeting those standards and providing that trail along our property line. But I believe the property to the north is undeveloped. So that the canal will go, below ground and then come up above ground and then go back below ground along that trail in the single-family neighborhood until the next parcel is developed.
So I don't know, can anybody explain to me why it is that we're wanting to underground that canal there? We generally like the water features, at least I like the water features that...
It's really quite a burden to this project, honestly. It's expensive where the water comes up and goes down, and we're having to do that both in a very, very short distance. I don't see the need to underground it because it's above ground on both sides, but perhaps, it's just for the future.
David or Andy, anybody can explain why it is that we're going to be undergrounding a canal? Mr. Herzog, is undergrounding a canal something that they have required you to do in other jurisdictions?
We've never done it in any other jurisdictions. The property in Chico is a state and federal waterway. It's a protected creek, so we're working with State Department, Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, California Water Quality Control Board. So that's a really environmentally sensitive situation. And so it's really sensitive to how we drain the surface water because it's not going into storm drain in that location. But we have never undergrounded a canal.
So your preference is to not underground if you can get away with not undergrounding?
The project is already fairly short on funds, and with construction costs rising and everything else, every dollar matters. So if that was not a requirement, that would really reduce the burden on the project. We do have a rough estimate from the engineers I know it's in our development budget, but.
All right, let me hear from staff as to why.
Hi, Council. Sean from Engineering. We do have that section of Jefferson planned to be underground. We started the work up at the Enterprise Canal at the northernmost stretch, and we've done some work to the south. So this would be a continuation of that. It's also planned to have a trail in that area. So if we left the canal open and had a trail, that would just impact the site a little bit more. So, I mean, there is a cost, but this does give them a little bit more room to have parking and more spaces for units.
So, explain to me again why we are requiring the undergrounding? It's part of our plan that we had to either generally for this area, but also has been executed north of this area?
Yeah, it's a continuation of the plan that we have both to the north and south of this site, to have it piped and then to put the trail on top of that pipe.
So if it was not undergrounded, are you saying that there would be not enough space for the trail?
The trail would just shift more into the site a little bit, and I mean, I guess that could be workable, but we've got the site laid out right now, considering that we're going to pipe it and just maximizing the stalls that we can get and maximizing the units that we can achieve too.
So we don't like to get involved in negotiations here on the council dais, but I think what I'm hearing is that it makes some more land available for your project if it gets undergrounded, and so there may be some room for discussion, at least in my mind. But it may be that there is some agreements that we've reached over past projects that are connected to this canal that would prevent any opportunity for further discussion on the issue. But I don't know if it's worthwhile for you to explore, knowing that you might be having to give up some of the space.
Yeah, we'll look into it. I mean, I think it's part of the community connectivity plan in that area. And obviously, there's a lot of benefits, I think, to undergrounding too, by way of safety and evaporation and water loss, because a lot of that I think it's Enterprise Canal, Clovis City surface water. So perhaps it was well thought out in the past, and we'll just continue on with the plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Drew?
In your Chico complex, do you have on-site management?
Yeah, 100% of our communities are professionally managed by Wynn Residential. It's the 5th largest management company in the nation for this type of housing. They manage all the U.S. military installations. They manage over 20,000 units in California. Their corporate office on the West Coast is here in Fresno, and they're a very reputable, well-respected management firm.
With a complex this size, what do you estimate your staff, or your management staff and maintenance people? How many would you have?
One full-time resident manager that will live on site, and early on, because it's brand new, there'll probably be a part-time maintenance tech. And as the property matures, it'll probably require a full-time maintenance technician. But we will share maintenance techs and maintenance staff with our other communities. Just the project right out by Clovis Community Hospital is staffed with 2.5 staff on the maintenance side, so they might share because that's a close location. But yeah, there'll be a resident manager, third-party resident managed property management firm, and on-site staff that live there. One unit is designated for a staff member.
Great, thank you.
One more.
Just a comment, so thank you for the neighborhood outreach. I think that's super important on these by-right projects, so there's no reason, there's not a requirement that you have to do it, but I think it's the right thing to do so people at least are aware of what's coming, so thank you for doing that. And I'm not sure about transit access. Is this near a transit line, or will that be part of as Loma Vista builds out?
Yeah, as Loma Vista builds out, there is a heavy transit component to the Loma Vista Urban Center. We haven't seen those demands come. Transit right now is doing a new master plan update.
So it'll take
and they'll be taking into account projects, and as we see demand increase, serve it.
Okay.
Sir,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one question. There are 58 units for this development, and all are affordable housing units.
Correct.
And does that expire, though, as far as...
55, it's a 55-year regulatory use that's recorded a regulatory agreement on the property. And so the housing will be in a minimum of 55 years.
55 years, so
Correct.
that's the term. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right.
Anyone,
You're welcome.
anyone else wishing to comment on this item? None from the chamber. Anyone from the website? No?
No public comment.
Okay, so we bring it back to the council.
I'll make a motion that we approve the application and adopt the permanent local housing allocation plan for the permanent local housing allocation program. Wow, that was original. And approving the commitment of the funds to the Jefferson Affordable Housing Project at 1703 North the Wolf.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Ayes. 4 ayes and 1 absence. Thank you. Item number 9, consider items associated with the establishment of objective standards for single-family residential development. A, consider approval of resolution, a request to adopt objective single-family residential design and development standards. B, consider introduction of an ordinance, a request to amend the standards of the R1 MD single-family residential medium density zone district and the general property development and use standards related to the parking for single-family residential uses. And C, consider policy direction, a request to provide direction to staff to remove an existing standard requiring that all park and landscape improvements be installed and accepted prior to issuance of 40% of the subdivision tracts building permit. And staff is Mr. Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you noted, tonight's discussion is with regard to a couple of related items, and then we'll throw you a little bit of a curveball on one of those items. The primary consideration this evening is the adoption of objective standards for single-family residential development. And there's an accompanying ordinance amendment which would help to achieve consistency between the objective standards and the existing development code. The curveball this evening is in the event that for any reason the objective standards aren't adopted, there's one particular standard that is in the package that we talked to the BIA, and they would like to see if they can put that particular, or if you can put that particular issue to bed this evening if the objective standards as a whole are not considered. If you do adopt the objective standards, it would be taken care of and no separate action would be necessary. You probably recall that about 3.5 months ago, your council considered the objective standards at the March 1st meeting. After 90 minutes or so of exciting discussion, you had a number of other things going on that evening, and somewhere near the finish line, I think we decided to continue the item and get it rescheduled when it was time. We put it on and off the agenda a couple times, waiting for the right time, and tonight is that time, so we've rescheduled and renoticed the discussion for this evening. We're here with objective standards because state law, as amended specifically by SB 330, requires the application of adopted objective standards for most housing projects. Back at the end of 2019, the council adopted objective standards for multifamily development, apartments, including the apartment complex that was discussed a little earlier during the last item. And this would catch up the city's processes and standards to apply to single-family development. In this context, objective means that no personal or subjective judgment would be applied by a public official. And the purpose of these requirements is to streamline the approval of housing development projects, both in terms of the timing it takes to review and approve housing projects, as well as to hopefully alleviate some of the uncertainty as to how standards would be applied and interpreted by folks that are reviewing and approving projects. The question of objective versus subjective is interesting. A couple of examples on the screen. Subjective standards, and these are the standards the state has told us that they don't want to see applied to housing projects. Examples are ensure the new projects are compatible with the character of the neighborhood and ensure the new buildings are in harmony with the height and size of adjoining structures. These aren't out of our practices, but they're not atypical of what historically some of the buzzwords of housing conditions, what they might look like. So words like compatibility, complementary, harmony, character, these are all things that will vary pretty substantially according to the person that's interpreting them and applying them, and the state has told us to move away from that. Examples of objective criteria are much more measurable and specific. These second two with the check boxes are out of our City of Clovis recommended standards, or breaking up walls with 20 feet of uninterrupted length, and using at least 2 but not more than 5 colors on building elevations. So they're measurable, they're understandable. Anybody who can count and see colors, no offense to the color line, but would generally be interpretable. So before we dive into the objective standards themselves, I want to talk a little bit about the 2 typical approaches that we use for the approval of residential tract maps. The first approach is what might be called kind of a standard subdivision R1 zoning approach. And that's where the code includes defined standards for lot sizes in particular, but also lot coverage, setbacks, building heights, and so forth. These kind of subdivisions are non-gated, they have public streets, generally there's sidewalks on both sides, there's public open space, there's not a lot of variation in what we see in terms of compliance with the city's standards and specifications. Maps of this type are approved through the tract map process. They don't require rezoning, and they generally are considered by the council. They're approved in final form by the Planning Commission, unless there's some unique circumstances that are associated. The second approach is what we call the planned residential development, or PRD process. And these are where there are unique or custom standards that are proposed by a developer and approved by the council on a project-by-project basis. These are a little more unique in their nature. They can't be gated, and they're private neighborhoods. They can have private streets and open space. Sometimes there's no sidewalks, or sidewalks on only one side. The process here also requires a tract map, but in each instance, there's also a rezoning and what's called a residential site plan review, or RSPR, required. That adds a couple of months to the process in order to enjoy that process. Because it's designed to be custom and unique, project by project, objective standards are not required for this type of development. And just in terms of scale, the vast majority of, over the last, let's say, 3 to 5 years, of the lots that have been created in Clovis have been created through the PRD process, using unique and custom standards, regardless of parcel size.
Dave, I want to just ask a clarifying question here, if I can, Mayor. So what you're suggesting is just, in this slide, is that generally there are 2 different types of approaches to residential tract maps, or are you saying specifically, even under the new law, they can take both approaches? And we would have some, it sounds like, based on what I see, objective standards not required into the PRD, there is going to be some analysis as to what benefit there may be of having a PRD.
Correct. And not to get too deep into the weeds, any property for which a developer would like to propose a PRD type development would need to be rezoned or pre-zoned to the PRD zone district. We don't have any of that on the ground zoning that's not attached to an existing project. So a developer was looking for like a gated neighborhood, or they want to have a broad mix of parcel sizes or unique sidewalk configurations, anything like that, they would propose as part of their package a rezone to the PRD zone district, and then it would be evaluated based on that proposal, and the commission and your council would have the chance to weigh it on its own merits. And again, because it's a non-mandatory process, it does not lend itself to objective standards. This is not a, quote, housing development project under the law, and the objective standards requirement doesn't apply here.
So if somebody wants to go with the PRD, then that law related to streamlining the process would not necessarily apply.
Correct.
Okay, but if they went under the standard R1 zoning, now we're starting to talk about objective standards.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And I think it's fair to say that the state, in adopting SB 330 and some of the accompanying legislation, is looking to ensure that the objective streamlined process is available in a straightforward, navigable way. Not that it will always be utilized, but that option exists, and the developers aren't required to go through a rezoning process in order to get a traditional subdivision.
So Dave, I think I was confused about this last time, but I'm already confused. So they wouldn't, I mean, much of our development on a traditional subdivision in an R1 zone district, there's no rezoning required. If the land is already zoned for that, there isn't a requirement for rezoning, so, right?
Depending on what the current zoning is.
If it's zoned for R1 or whatever,
yes.
and it matches, so there's not a rezone requirement in that transaction.
Correct.
But you said that the majority of our development over the last X amount of months has been this planned residential development?
Yes. And that has occurred probably for a couple of different reasons. One is that a good portion of the development applications that are coming through are annexations, include annexations, in which case they need to be pre-zoned, and developers are looking to identify the zone district that gives them the most flexibility to do what they're looking to do. Or they're coming in with a general plan amendment to increase the density, in which case, again, they're having to rezone anyway to get to the kind of development that they're looking for. So in those cases, instead of zoning to the R1MD zone, which would give them defined development standards, they're rezoning to the PRD, which gives them, whatever mix of standards that they propose, and your council is willing to grant them.
Well, just at the risk of revealing what I'm now afraid is memory loss, I don't remember rezoning to PRDs. I'm not remembering that's its own zone. Am I the only one? I'm not remembering that we ever took an action that says, well, I'd like to make a motion to rezone this property to a planned residential development.
It would
80% of the time.
It would be, and it's a small difference. It's one of those things that mostly, I think, the pointy-headed planner types are spotting. The difference is an R1 zone versus an R1 PRD. So it sounds an awful lot like the same thing. In one case, it's a permitted zone. In one case, it's a planned zone.
Okay, it's good. Memory loss right here. I don't recall that. With the frequency that you said it occurs, I think that's what I just can't get my mind around. But okay, I'll admit that I don't remember. Okay. Sorry. Sad.
Dave, could you go back one page, please?
My clicker doesn't work, so there we go. Now we're back.
We just discussed this affordable housing complex.
Yes.
And I used a very vague term of not Loma Vista-esque. In this situation, we would have to come up with objective written standards of elevations, and and I realize I put you on the spot, but what would that sound like if we were saying, hey, we want this to look similar to the community center that we're building by Clovis East? What would that sound like?
There are criteria in our multifamily design standards. We only have one set of design standards, and those are our objective design standards. Those do point to compliance with the criteria in the adopted specific plans or the relevant specific plans. So we do go back to our specific plans where there are design criteria, and we apply them as such. I'm hedging there because there's not going to be at this point a definition of the features that are required to implement a Loma Vista compatible design.
Looking at the first line there, compatible with the character of the neighborhood,
Yeah.
and that's not permitted. So we would,
With the specific plan for Loma Vista's craftsman style.
Yeah,
So can that be an objective, requirement?
yeah, ideally, we would
'Cause
have.
what is craftsman style? That's the style, that's
There
not.
there are some features of various architectural styles which can be articulated. We haven't done that, so there are going to be some massaging of the criteria as projects are received. We haven't quite figured out how to way not to have that done at some point. So I guess we can call that a work in progress. It's something that we're aware of.
Councilmember Bessinger said Loma Vista-ish, it's that, I interpret that to mean the craftsman style that we established out there. And this is saying we can't do that.
Yeah, that does say
But
what you described.
but can't we codify what the craftsman style is and make it objective?
I guess, Mr. Mayor, the answer is, to some degree, that can be done. We don't at this point have it in either standard, and we'll have to continue to work on incorporating it.
We don't want to be exclusive, but we also don't want it to, there's some compatibility. Not. We don't want to exclude people.
Yeah, and we're creeping into the weeds and off the subject, but to reinforce your point, I'll tell you that
That is totally the subject. That's what you're,
Yeah.
and we're not being subjective either.
correct. We had just approved a multifamily project on the site of the former the previous item, that multifamily site. Just a couple of months ago, we approved a project. It was a little more Spanish in style, and Loma Vista doesn't just require craftsmen. It can be Spanish colonial craftsmanship. And the architect for the current project looked at that previously approved project, and he said, "Oh, I don't think that really complies as much with your Loma Vista plan as it probably should. Let me work on that some more." And so that's, I guess, to reinforce your point. There's still some eye of the beholder or some designer judgment involved as to how the guidance from the specific plan should be implemented.
Well,
So that's a work in progress. I don't want to let that get us too far astray. You're reinforcing the point that we probably need to even be more specific as we move forward with considering some of those design features and how we incorporate them.
Well, I think we need to make them, sorry, but I think we need to make them objective, because I think the point of all of this is if otherwise you just end up with a free-for-all. If you don't have to comply with all of the hard work to make any of these specific plans, Loma Vista,
Right.
Northwest,
Heritage.
then, that one too, Heritage Grove. I
Well,
mean, what would
even the
point of that?
industrial
Helm
parks,
Rest.
even the industrial
Yeah,
parks.
any of it. I mean, that doesn't seem like, that seems risky. So this applies to any kind of housing type, multifamily, single family, anything.
Correct, yeah.
But this was the intent of the legislation to remove the authority of local governments in the architecture, design of housing, and basically to almost force us to take whatever we're served.
To a large degree, it feels that way, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I'll have something later, I'm sure.
If I may, Mayor. So in this Loma Vista, what we used to call a specific plan, I think it's been incorporated into the general plan now. There are both objective and they're both objective and some areas for subjectivity. And what I understand you communicating is that within the planning department, you guys are trying to understand just exactly what within the general plan is considered to be subjective and what is considered to be objective. And that at some point you'll be making those adjustments. And I think what you're hearing from the council is, to the degree that we can make the subjective objective, we would like to do that. So when you come back for those changes, if it's, you know, both consistent with the law and consistent with our goals of creating a sense of community in those areas, as opposed to just kind of a eclectic hodgepodge of designs, then we would like to, you know, communicate that the subjective should be objective if it's possible within the law. And then secondarily, what I hear you communicating is that there are people who are going to be putting projects into the communities within the city of Clovis, our villages within the community of Clovis, who are more than happy to comply with some of our themes associated with those particular villages, and they want to put together a successful project, and so they're going to do that, like I think that Mr. Herzog's project was alluding to, that, and you had mentioned that, well, we want to make sure it's consistent with the theme of character of that particular area. Now, they could just, you know, say, sorry, we're not going to do that, we're going to come in and do whatever it is that we want, and you guys can't say anything about that, because Sacramento has given us the authority to kind of just push things through. And we may come across people who are going to do that, but within at least this last project, and perhaps maybe some of our local developers as well, they're not trying to stick it to the city of Clovis. They're trying to just, you know, work within the standards that we have in place, and they're going to, I think, be good neighbors to the other projects that are around there. Am I understanding kind of?
You're right on target.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, great feedback. John, next slide. So we talked about the two approaches, the standard versus the PRD. Next slide. So diving a little bit now into the objective standards. As we talked a little bit, the recommended standards apply to all residential zone districts except the PRD zone. These standards account for the smaller lots and the larger lots in all zone districts. The standards relate primarily to the design of subdivision maps, as well as to placement of homes on individual lots. And the majority of these standards really come from our existing development code, our standards and specs, past policy and practice, conditions of approval. So we're not really talking about new standards dreamt up from scratch or drafted as brand new criteria. They mostly are pulled from historical practices. There are, however, a few instances where the standards reflect changes from the existing requirements in the development code, and if those are approved, there would be a need for code amendments to make sure that there aren't any inconsistencies. Slide. So I want to kind of focus on some of those development code amendments, because that's where the weight of the discussion on these objective standards has been. Back when we started looking at single-family standards in 2020, the development community immediately focused on the need to have objective standards that matched the intent of building on smaller lots. And as a result of that consultation with the BIA and other members of the development community, we really identified the need to, or the reasonableness of changing some of the standards to increase the flexibility on building on lots between 4,500 and 6,000 square feet. And those are lots that are created through the R1 MD zone. So again, the standards apply to all zone districts, but we're particularly looking at the potential changes to standards in the R1 MD zone. So that's kind of why the focus is on the R1 MD zone here. Because so much of our development in the last several years has been through the PRD process, we looked at the standards that have been approved through the PRD process for these kind of lots and kind of use that as a baseline for what our standards, our objective standards might look like. And we came up with some recommendations for reductions in setbacks, a little bit smaller garage sizes, increases in lot coverage, and allowance for tandem style garages as an alternative to standard garages. That last item, the tandem garages, that's been relatively infrequent. It's kind of an addition or nod to the potential for creative solutions where it called for, but I don't expect it to be all that much used.
Just so we're all clear on the same terms, tandem garage, can you please explain that?
Tandem garage is basically a 10-foot wide by 40-foot deep garage that allows two vehicles to park in front and in back of each other.
So they would not be side to side?
Correct. Front to back. So the city's experience through the planned residential development process has shown that these kind of reduced setbacks can work as minimum standards. We found that generally, even when allowed, they're not all built to that minimum standard. And while we believe that there's greater flexibility created by these reduced standards in the R1MD zone, we want to make it clear that the reductions are not required. There's not a section or a term in SB 330 or any other provision in state law that says we have to do this or that we have to create this flexibility. It's simply a decision yielding from the consultation we've had and sort of the evaluation of past practices that we have seen. And any of the standards that are included in the recommendation can be removed or modified. And we've specifically noted that any of the standards in that R1MD zone that we're proposing to change, if those are uncomfortable, you can simply default back to the existing code standard that is in place today. And the overall function of the objective standards wouldn't be in jeopardy if the council wanted to go there. We would just simply make that change, adopt the standards, and move forward. One of the particular standards that is recommended to change, I wanted to highlight here because it's kind of been a focal point, or maybe the poster child for the objective standards, and that's the recommendation to change from a 5-foot garage side setback down to a 4-foot setback. And the intent was here to allow some enhanced flexibility to maybe be able to keep a wider garage with the same size house without having to sacrifice one or the other. And we know, because it's been implemented a couple of times, that it can work, that 4-foot garage side setback can work. But it's also equally clear that it requires greater attention to locating things like trash enclosure, storage areas, working around gas meters, water heaters, landscaping, gates, and those sorts of things. Talking with the Public Utilities Department even earlier today, they've cited some examples where that attention wasn't given, and there are some examples where you simply can't get even a smaller enclosure around a water meter and into a backyard. You're having to go, into or through the garage to get there, and that's just a fact of life when you got small setbacks or narrow standards, and kind of not even a misplace, but just a lack of attention to detail on placing things like gas meters. Sometimes you're going to end up with unintended consequences, and those do exist. So the takeaway here is that if the city and if your council values having greater consistency in achieving the results you're looking for, above the flexibility enhancement that you'd get with narrower setbacks, then probably the safer approach is to just stick with a 5-foot garage side setback. All things considered, it's going to give us better results over time. And if a developer wants to pursue a narrower garage side setback, they can continue to use it through the PRD process or even through a variance if that's what it took. So we staff like the flexibility, and that was the intention. But honestly, after looking at some of the, for lack of a better word, the horror stories or where it's gone wrong, we would acknowledge the safer approach is to stick with the wider traditional 5-foot garage side setback. So I'll leave that particular point with you, and we can come back to it at the end of this presentation. I mentioned earlier that there was one specific criteria dealing with park improvements and landscaping improvements. We have had a traditional condition of approval on track maps requiring that all landscaping improvements be installed prior to the issuance of 40% of the building permits within a subdivision tract. And that's really to make sure that those landscaping improvements get done before all of the permits are issued and the developer is done with a building, with a subdivision tract. And that standard condition of approval was built into the objective standards that were reviewed and recommended for approval by the Planning Commission last January. After that discussion, staff worked with the BIA on looking at this condition in particular and reached a mutual decision that it just really doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to be in there. It's not adhered to on a strict basis. It's unnecessary because the subdivision improvements that are called for, those landscaping and park improvements, they have to be done before a tract can be accepted and a bond can be released. So there's pretty minimal risk of anything unintended happening there. And the development community has indicated that just having a condition applied to their tracts does create a burden on them that they'd like to avoid. This evening, the BIA...
Just to put a point on that burden, is a burden related to financing?
I think it can be, yes,
Okay,
if I understand correctly.
Any additional conditions somehow create some problems?
Yes, and,
Okay.
and BIA representative is here this evening and can probably articulate on that more. And in particular, there was a request that if the council would act on this condition in particular tonight, if you don't deal with the full standards for any reason, that would allow them to take something off of their critical to-do list, if you will. Next slide. One of the other public comments that we got was a request to consider an 18 by 20 garage size. So the reduced garage size that's recommended for the R1MD standards is a 20 by 20. That's down a little bit from a 22 by 20. And so your council has on a couple of different occasions approved an 18 by 20 or very similar garage size on an exception basis. We took a look at standard vehicle sizes. We took an informal survey of what other cities were doing. We just didn't really find that on a consistent basis we were saying garage sizes less than 20 by 20, and often they were bigger than that. And the problem that we saw on consistently allowing a smaller garage size is that sooner or later what typically goes into the garage spills out into the driveway and eventually out onto the street with more vehicles, and over time you get a watering down of kind of the streetscape. So I'm not suggesting that an 18 by 20 garage size can't work, because we have seen it work, but this is one of those situations where as an objective standard, as the minimum requirement, we felt like a 20 by 20 was the minimum we felt comfortable with. So that is our response to that particular request. A second request, this one came from the BIA, was that the city consider compact single-family standards. Those would apply to lots as small as 1,800 square feet. Mostly that's going to be like a townhome style or an elevation style lot. We've approved enough of those as a city that it may make sense to develop objective criteria for that, but there isn't a current zone district which implements that size lot, and a new one would have to be created in order to have objective standards. And if a new zone district would be created, it would probably need to be inclusive of criteria for open space and subdivision amenities, the kind of things that have become typical with, sorry, I keep hitting the power button here. And as such, staff would recommend that we continue to work with the BIA on what those standards and criteria would look like, and we'll bring it back through the Planning Commission and to your council once it's been fully cooked, assuming that we can get there with the BIA. Next slide. So kind of going back to the beginning, we know that the SB 330 requires adopted standards to be implemented for all kinds of development. Multifamily standards are in place. Single-family standards are proposed. There's a resolution recommending objective criteria for single-family development that are on the table this evening. There is also the need to introduce an ordinance to amend the existing development code to incorporate those objective criteria. That would really be with or without the R1MD zone, unless those criteria are eliminated entirely. And then again, as I've mentioned, there's a request to deal with that one park and landscaping timing requirement if the full set of objective standards is not adopted this evening. If the standards are adopted this evening, that requirement goes away and no other action is required. So thanks for bearing with me. I know that was a lot to absorb, particularly after you had 90 minutes of previous discussion on the item, so I will sit back and answer any questions you have.
Any more questions for Dave? Lynn?
I can't remember what we talked about 3 months ago, so it's all new, it's all good. Dave, in here, I was trying to see if I could find an objective standard on the placement of homes on lots. Is that in here? Did I not see it?
Yeah, so placement of homes on lots would be basically setbacks, front, side, and rear setbacks, as well as lot coverage. So those would be the placement criteria.
But we have had conditions where we say you can't have two houses the same elevation next to each other so that you don't get that row housing effect. We have had conditions more specifically over the years.
You're right.
And I think one of the things that I do think I said this in March, walking precincts recently in these neighborhoods that are built like this was not a pleasant experience. I thought the neighborhoods were tough. They are not aging well and they're not very old. And so you use the phrase, we're trying to get better results over time. So I feel like we need to be so careful. I think this is sort of landmark kind of changes to our development practices, even though this might be what we do. But one of the things that struck me in some of the neighborhoods is when they were all two-story, all the same elevation, all the same lineup, it does not feel like a friendly place to have your kids play outside. So I'm worried about what this is going to memorialize for Clovis, and I don't think some of these neighborhoods have built out quite like we would want them to have. That's too many words in that sentence, but you get my point. I did not see that placement thing in here.
You're right. There is a requirement that deals with setbacks so that homes are not all in a straight line. But you're right. It looks like we left out the repeated model criteria.
Might be worth just considering, again, your words, better results over time.
Yes.
And we're talking 50 years from now. What are these neighborhoods going to look like? And I won't be here to look at them, but I think it's our job to leave it in a way that we think will be the right kind of community we want to leave behind us. So,
Bob?
Thank you. David, I want to kind of direct your attention to what is page 106 of our packet. It's attachment A to this item. And in it, you'll find a table identified as 2-3. And in that table, there are some strike-throughs and then some underlined bold, which are going to be the changes that are apparently being recommended by staff to council. I just want to just first kind of address what would be my approach to the idea of providing objective standards, and that is that if these objective standards are designed to, I'll call it by right, though I don't think that's a true characterization of it, but basically, if you meet these minimum standards, then you can go in and start building your project, and it can get done quickly. The subjectivity is being removed. So under those circumstances, I would want to create minimum standards which are going to present a more reliable product, at least from my perspective. So as an example, when we look at the front and it says 10 foot as opposed to 15 foot to living porch and projections, and instead of 20 foot, it would be 18 to garage wall and 20 foot minimum to garage door. So what I would want to do is not actually decrease those setbacks, I'll call them setbacks, but actually increase or at least keep them the same. So I don't want to make it a more dense project, or if we're going to be saying that it's necessarily going to be, something you can just build without any kind of overview by either planning staff or council. And then in the side setbacks, I guess I'm a little confused on this one just generally because I thought we talked about 5 foot as opposed to 3 foot or 4 foot. So on that same table where it says side and it says each, it's 4 feet is basically how it presently is. And then staff recommendation is, it looks like 4 foot garage, 3 foot interior. So that seems like it would be creating a minimum standard which is going to provide for a change in what our present minimum standards are. And then rear 10 instead of 15, and then maximum parcel coverage 55 instead of 45%. So my approach is a little bit different than maybe staff's approach. I'm not trying to make it a more dense project when it comes to minimum standards. If anything, I'd want our minimum standards to be more difficult to meet, so that the quality of the project is going to be something consistent with what we've come to expect within the city of Clovis. Does my reasoning make sense to you? When I say I don't want it to make it easier, I want it to make it tougher, in the sense that it is, I know we want to get some streamlining processes, but it's like, if you want to streamline through, then it's like these standards are standards that are, going to be maybe a little bit more difficult for you to meet, because if we're giving you free rein, we want to make sure it is a quality project as opposed to one that's going to be of lesser quality, at least when it comes to these particular standards. So, so my view is that, no, we don't make it the setbacks more narrow or less distance. We make them what they are presently, or even higher or wider setbacks. So for me, I don't, I understand where planning staff is coming from, but that is not where I'm coming from. I want it to be that, if anything, we're making these standards, I'll call it tougher for the builders to meet, because frankly, you've got free rein under these minimum standards. Now, if they want to come in and they want to say, well, we want to have, 55 maximum parcel coverage instead of the 45%, well, they can do that, but they have to go through the PRD process. And that's when subjectivity starts to play. I shouldn't call it subjectivity, but that means that, okay, there's going to be a slowing down of the streamlining process, because at that point we need to have some conversations about, okay, well, if we start to go with the PRD, then we expect something that's going to be of some advantage to the broader community, as opposed to just kind of putting it in there. So those are, I want to mention those concerns to you and see if maybe you can explain why perhaps maybe my thinking on that is wrong. And I'm willing to accept whatever constructive criticism you can offer out there on my approach.
The immediate response is that the lack of the 5 foot existing side setback is a typo. So you caught us on that one for sure.
It should say 5.
It should say 5 is existing and a 4 and the 3 were proposed. Your logic holds as far as I'm concerned in terms of wanting to keep the baseline objective standards to a level that we have greatest confidence that we understand what the project is going to be. And so, for instance, where we talk about the existing setbacks that have been in place, it probably makes sense to retain those, because those are the existing setbacks that we have found are appropriate for the zone district. I would be personally hesitant to increase the standards beyond what they are today, because one of the things SB 330 does say is that the standards need to be consistent with the type of development that's called for by the zone district. And then if we increase the standards much, then we could get to a point where it would be unrealistic to see homes built under those standards in that zone district. So I think you're probably pretty safe with leaving the standards in place. going, much, above or making the standards much more strict, I think we'd want to exercise some caution there and maybe look at what the alternatives are.
And then I also want to make sure that we're clear that when it comes to the compact development that was addressed, that is probably something that BIA is requesting at this point, but it is incongruous with any of the particular zonings that we already have in place. So while they may make that request, the planning staff's position is it doesn't make sense to have that conversation at this point because we don't have any zoning that's going to allow for that type of implementation. All right, thank you.
I was just going to comment. I think I do remember a few things, but I think part of how how you got to some of these numbers is, I think there was a preface comment made last time that we do some of these now, and that was sort of the tension about, well, past practice may not be future practice, right? So I think to your point about how we got to the lesser, we have tested some of these out, and I think that was also one of the pushbacks in March was, well.
I'm sorry for interrupting, because I think that's a valuable point. When we were testing these and we saw that some of these things would work, that was generally under a PRD?
Correct.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
But then this really says have at it, you can do it anytime. So I think that was another reason just how we got to this point. I guess I would also comment, I feel like this R1MD, too many MDs in my life, R1MD zone district probably needs to come with, I think, your reference in the slide before about the more compact would come with some prescribed open space or park. I'm not so sure this doesn't apply to this either. I really think we're getting so small that, again, over time, we might be sorry that we didn't consider some of those or at least referencing in this MD zone district as well.
Right.
Okay. SB 330 basically took away, what it wants to do is expedite the development and reduce what we as a council can do locally as far as, it basically took away a lot of our discretion. So we cannot stop what we don't like, because throughout California, city councils were not approving development that, using your words, difficult to meet. So, I mean, what you're asking them to do is exactly the opposite of what the law wants, what Sacramento wants us to do. Is they want to expedite development by making it easier, not harder, easier to develop. And so so to fight what Sacramento is doing is again just welcoming another more litigious activity by those groups that claim that we don't want people here.
Well, can I just kind of point out that I think it's wrong for me to have used more difficult, because anything that we do that's going to be streamlining, any standards that we set, it's going to make it easier on the developer to come in. Now, it may not make it work or pencil out for them because the setbacks are too wide and our garages are, too large, but that doesn't make it necessarily more difficult, because whatever we choose to do on these minimum standards, then it's like we remove our opportunity to have some conversation about it. But if we keep our standards the same,
but that's the spirit of this law. They want to remove. That's why they passed this law.
Well, I would say that the spirit of the law is to expedite, not necessarily to make it more
they wanted
financially
to freeze
feasible.
The ability of local government to downzone, adopt new development standards, or change land use to residential and mixed-use areas that change the results of less intensive use. They want more intensive use. They know that California city councils will not approve higher intensity of use, higher density of use, and that the neighborhoods won't allow it either. Well, I'm just trying to explain the law and why we're here.
To the attorney?
No, well, yeah. When he says difficult to me, no, they don't want it difficult to me. They want it easy to me. I mean, so yes, I guess I'm explaining it to an attorney. Yeah, it was a good word. So, I think it should be practical. I think we should look, is it 5 feet or is it 4 feet? 4 feet is not practical. People could potentially die because it's not safe to have all these plastic containers right in front of our police and fire because they can't get to the back for the person who's had a heart attack in the backyard, the tiny little backyard but backyard nevertheless, because that's what they want too. They want us to have small yards, small everything, and build more houses and less land. And I don't think we have much of a say-so anymore, but to agree to a lot of these new standards. Drew?
Oh, sorry.
No, I think if we come up with reasonable, objective standards, we'll be fine. I think we stick with what we have now because we've gotten smaller and we didn't like it for any number of reasons. If we go bigger, I think we open ourselves up to litigation, the criticism, certainly. But if we remain consistent, because I think we're in a defensible position. I remember when we were talking about the 4-foot setback, and I talked about somebody having to wrangle a heavy toter out. I mean, all you're doing is forcing a situation where I'm just going to leave it outside, and then once you have one house that isn't taking care of stuff, it's much easier for other people to just kind of follow suit. So if we stay the course with what we have explored and negotiated, I think we're going to be okay.
I think that SB 330, as I understand it, isn't about, clearly that drive is to density, but this just says make it the same Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Everyone is the same rules for this zone district. So now these standards or what we have now, or, I think that's the secret. Density is a different question, but I think as long as they're objective and consistent, that to me meets the spirit of SB 330. And if the builders want to do a 4-foot something or a 18-foot something else, then that could be a PRD, and apparently we do those a lot. Again, news to me, but they have another vehicle where they can go that way too, I think. I agree with, I think this is too, I'm not willing to make these really small, these changes. I don't think that's what we want to do, but that's just me and him. Okay, we're done. No, just kidding.
Any more questions for Dave? No? No. Okay, we'll open it to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item, please come to the podium.
Evening, Mayor, members of the council. Mike Prandini, representing the Building Industry Association. I'm here to speak in support of the staff recommendation of the items that on table 2-3. I know you guys, David has changed his mind on, or staff has changed their mind, maybe not just Dave, but the staff has changed their mind on the setback, and I heard some comments by the city council to go to 5 feet instead of 4 feet. But the whole purpose of these few changes that are in here are designed to speed up the process by 3 to 4 months of the time you have to go through the process. From my builders are telling me it takes minimum of 2 months, but more likely 4 months to go through the process to get these changes. As Dave indicated, if you go through the PRD process, you get these, you get before the city council, before the planning commission, to then haggle out these changes to get the shortened rear yard setbacks, getting the coverage ratio to a higher percentage. All that entails risk when you have to go through that process. That increases your cost because you cannot design a house for a 4,500 square foot lot not knowing what your setback's gonna be. So if you have to go through the PRD process, you delay the construction and design and construction of the house by more than just that 4-month period, because you gotta wait to design the house until you know what the setbacks are. Then you know what model you can put on it and what design you can put on that lot. So the purpose of these changes is to speed up the process to be, as Mayor Flores indicated, what the intent of 330 is, even though it's not, doesn't say that. It just says you gotta be consistent, you gotta be objective. So, and the city is allowed to set their objective standards. So what the industry is asking for is, since the PRD has maybe the council basically is changing their mind on what you want to allow through the PRD process. Not just the standard, but what you want to allow during the PRD process. So instead of a guy coming through with a 10-foot setback, instead of the 15-foot setback, you give them a 12-foot setback or a 13-foot setback. So the industry is looking for consistency and certainty in the standards rather than have to wait and determine what it's going to be at the end of the process. And the issue, Councilmember Ashbeck, is the location of the house on the lot is all dependent on these setbacks and the design of the house that'll fit on that lot with those setbacks. So that determines where and the coverage, the lot coverage. So, but we are in support of these changes for those reasons, is that it does speed up the process, it gives them certainty, and that certainty comes into play with the lenders. You cannot go into a project with uncertainties, so they have to delay their financing, they have to delay their design. So all that impacts, quote, time is money, and that time costs. And in order for the industry to have certainty, we've worked with the staff a long time on these standards. I mean, there was a lot of other stuff thrown around, but this is what we have agreed to. Now, I'm not here to argue 4 feet instead of 5 feet. I think that's probably, in my mind, a minor correction. Now, my builders, I see one builder here is not a member of the BIA, but he can understand that. I mean, maybe he doesn't want to be associated with the BIA, but he could explain that setback issue, the 4 feet and the 5 feet, better than I can. See, he is a builder. But our whole objective was to make these standards so that when the annexation was completed and the zone change was made to R1MD, they would know exactly what they can do with that piece of property down to these as the minimum standards. Do all builders build to the minimum standards? No. Do some of them? Yes. But the whole purpose is to make it so that you can get in, get your project, get it done, and get it financed, and get it through the process as fast as possible to reduce your cost. And in today's market, that's critical, because we do have a shortage of homes, and they do need to be built faster, as fast as they can, and they're trying to get it through the process, and this speeds up that process. I think, we do support this. Now, as Davis stated before, we have talked about higher density projects. Rather than utilize the PRD process to do that, we want to create a zone district that sets out all the standards, which includes, a high-density project would necessarily include some amenities that go into the project to make for the community, in addition to the residents of that particular project, but that's for another day. We are in discussions with the staff. We don't know how long that's going to take. We haven't even looked at what the quote amenities might look like, but that is for another day. But we have, Dave is correct. We've thrown that out, and so we are working through that process. That may take some time. But anyway, so we're supporting the changes that are recommended by the staff, and we think they're appropriate as they have been achieved in the past through the PRD process. So the thinking is, if you got to go through the PRD process and get these kind of standards, and that's what's been approved, then why not make them a regular standard that anybody can achieve rather than have to go through a special process to achieve those? So that's my comments for this evening.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, if you don't mind staying up there, because I want to be fair to you and those that you represent related to an opportunity for you to comment on what I likely was going to be commenting on after the public portion was closed. So I want to provide an opportunity for you to criticize my viewpoint. So we're talking about, in my view, two separate things. One is expediting the process, which is what the law now is, requiring cities to do by developing these minimum standards and making sure that no matter who comes through, that if they have these minimum standards, then they're good to go and it's going to be an expedited process. On the other hand, what we're talking about is making minimum standards that are going to create higher density within the city of Clovis that, comes in as a result of smaller garages and smaller setbacks, front and back and side to side. So, in my view, it's like the cake is being able to expedite the process, which is something that is foundational to profitability for the people that you represent. Expediting the process, time is money, and so you want to make sure that you expedite that process. The eating of the cake is not only expediting the process, but expediting it with these, I'll call it, lower standards that are going to increase density. And for me to suggest that to our citizens that you can have your cake and eat it too is disadvantageous to the community at large. It's like it's going to be one or the other. Expedite the process, or if you want to go through some of these, less setbacks and smaller garages, you're going to have to go through that PRD, which is going to be a longer process. Then choose that one. But you can't, as I follow the analogy, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to choose one. And the way that the council has been having the conversations, at least up to this point, is that that's kind of where we are. You can have the expedited process, or you can have the higher densities within the communities, but you can't have both, because once we set these minimum standards, it's going to be, full steam ahead, expedited process, and very little comment by planning staff and by the council in that process. So I think that for us to be able to adopt these minimum standards without making any of the recommended changes by planning staff is probably a safer bet for our community at large. So I want to lay that out for you so that you can constructively criticize it if you would like.
Yeah, the issue with that approach is that you're making the development community come in and make an application for something that you've given to them before. You've given them the shorter setbacks. You've given them the reduced criteria. You've given them the increased lot coverage. So the expectation is, why are you making us go through the process for something you're going to allow them to do? And you've done that in the past. Now, maybe the council as a whole, you decide that, well, we made a mistake in allowing that. We're not going to allow these anymore. Then do away with the PRD. If you're not going to allow these kind of changes, then you need, and allow the changes basically by, I hate to say by right, but by changing these standards, and there are not a whole lot of big changes there. There are changes to setback and lot coverage, are your two, most of the things that are being changed. And to go back and look at prior development and use of the PRD process, they had to use the PRD process because the code didn't have these standards that would allow these narrower, the less setback, and as a result, they had to go through they came up with the plan development process in order to achieve these more dense development, to put a certain size house on a certain size lot with setbacks and everything. And so the development community worked through that process, and over the years, they have used it to achieve what the staff is recommending as a standard. So I guess the question is, do you even want to have, if you're not going to allow these, then why use the PRD? You're forcing them to go through something that you've always granted them in the past. So it doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't make any sense to make the development community extend their approval process by that much time in order to get something that the council has awarded in the past and has allowed in the past. So that would be my response to your comment regarding the expediting, because in this case it will expedite and shorten that process, because they will know up front if they want the MD zone, they get these standards and they don't have to go through the additional step to get a PRD.
Can I ask a question? Is there a presumption if we create this MD zone district that we would then just update our zoning map so that that wouldn't be a request they'd have to make if it's currently zoned R1 something else? I mean, how does that work? Is that, or does tell me about that part.
The R1 MD zone already exists. It's part of the zoning code.
But not everything that they're building on is an R1 MD. To talk about how that's going to, how do I interpret that?
I don't think there's a presumption that we would go through and do a comprehensive zoning update to rezone to R1 MD. It would be an option for developers where the property is already zoned in that manner, or when the site is being pre-zoned or rezoned to achieve the density that they're looking for. So there is some R1MD inventory already out, on the books as we speak, and there would be an option to create more of it as developers pursue development of that density.
But if it's not currently zoned that and they wanted to rezone to this, that would be a rezone action they would be required to do.
Correct.
This wouldn't change any of that.
Yeah. Probably the most significant change, and I think it was addressed a little earlier, and I know the council is aware of it, as is the BIA, is a key component of the PRD process is the negotiation of an amenity, generally a public-facing amenity, and that is not necessarily a difficult process in terms of our relationship, staff's relationship with the development community, but it does add an air of uncertainty for both parties, and I think there's some element to make that more predictable, so folks that are looking to build at the R1MD density don't don't have to sort of wonder what kind of amenity they're going to have to bring to the table to get there.
But this
So that's certainly a
doesn't,
factor.
this doesn't address the amenities, does it?
It does not.
So so we're giving up amenities, then we're removing that from this conversation entirely, which is a really bad idea all by itself, if that's what's happening here.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
That is
that's a
that
really
is
bad idea.
one of the changes that it's worth noting. Again, the changes are basically reduced setbacks and increased lot coverage, and if those the benefits of those changes shouldn't come, in your opinion, at the cost of not having an offsetting amenity, then that's obviously, you know, your prerogative to make that decision.
Anyone else from the public wishing to comment on this item? Seeing none. Anybody on the web?
There are none.
No.
And we did not receive any public comment.
Okay, so bring it back to the council.
Well, I think that, based on some of the conversation that we have had, related to this particular, topic, I think that, what I'm hearing from the council, and at least is my view, and I know my view isn't always consistent with the council, but we don't want to make any changes to our R1MD, in order to have the minimum standards in place. That any developer can come in and, if they want to have an expedited process, then they need to meet the minimum standards that we already have in place. If they want something that is different than our minimum standards, then they have to go through the PRD process, and that PRD process is generally going to, require some adjustments to the setbacks and maybe size of garages. But as a result of that change, there's going to be some public benefit as in the form of a public amenity. So I think that, from my view, it looks like our approach should be one of keeping our present standards, not making any changes. And if somebody wants to come in with an expedited process, then they have to meet those standards that we presently have in place. So that's my view. I don't know if the council's still on board with that idea.
So I agree with what you said. I do think, however, so Mike, your point about it's not consistent. Well, if these are the standards, this would be consistent, right? You're really trying to eliminate that PRD step for your members and builders and others. So I get that. So I don't think this work is done. I would prefer not to say no to this, because I understand what we're trying to get to the expedited process. I still don't think the work is done. Like, for example, could we make the PRD process faster? We haven't talked about how to improve that at all. Could that be any faster? Could you build in amenities into this so that we don't lose that? That to me is a non-starter. If we give up that ability, and again, most builders they want amenities because they want people to live in their neighborhood. So we don't have those kinds of challenges in Clovis, but we may someday. So for me, the work's not done yet. I think this is too big. I'm going to vote no on it the way it is now, but I'd be prepared to keep talking about it. This would have been a really good planning commission workshop topic, so we could talk about it together. I just think this is too important. So I'm not going to vote for this, but I'm open to kind of keeping at it, because I know that you all have done a lot of work with BAA, but I feel like we identified issues today that we hadn't heard before. So I would be inclined to either vote no on it, if that's the option, or just to continue it and keep working on it, because there's no hurry, there's no rule that has to be today. I don't know, that's where I am on it.
Sure.
The side each 4-foot garage, is that a typo? Should it be 5 or
Yeah.
because because the 4-foot thing keeps coming back, and it feels like somebody's trying to sneak one by. I'll be honest with you, that's what it feels like.
The recommendation was to change the 5-foot both sides setback to a 4 and a 3. In typing out that change, we lost the 5-foot existing and just showed it as a 4 and a 3.
Okay, that is and I'm only one vote, but that's always a complete non-starter with me.
Okay, so,
All right, so I'm gonna go forward with some, a motion. And so the first item is related to the consideration of a resolution that requests, us to adopt, objective single-family residential design and development standards. So I'll move that we approve a resolution. I really don't know if we can really approve the resolution, though, because the wording of it, I want to make sure is really clear. And so I go down to the where we have on, the whereas, which is on, well, let's see, no, it's not the resolve, which is on page 102. It says the adoption of single-family objective standards is in substantial conformance with the environmental analysis performed by the general plan update. So I want to make sure that we are not adopting any new standards for R1MD. And as that resolution is presently worded, I don't see anything that says, and so we are adopting changes to our R1MD. Do you see that anywhere in the resolve portion?
No, the resolution adopting the objective standards would adopt the standards booklet in its entirety. And if you want to change any of those criteria, you should just include that in your motion, for instance, to eliminate any of the changes that are shown in the...
All right, that makes sense. So I'm going to move that we approve a resolution, which is a request to adopt objective single-family residential design and development standards, and that there be no changes to our R1MD residential standards as presently that we have in place presently. And so to be clear, that also means not making the recommended adjustments that have been suggested through the little booklet that is in our packet. Is that motion clear for the mayor and other council members? Okay.
so they do nothing today. Instead of...
Well, no, we're adopting minimum standards, but the minimum standards are what we presently already have in place for R1MD.
What the current standards.
Yeah.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those...
No. And I know because we're not done.
I know, you
the
think that
work
we can
is
do
too
some more
soon.
work, yeah.
I totally
get you.
So I'm voting no just because I'm not ready to act on it tonight.
So the vote is 3 ayes, 1 no, and 1 absence.
And then, if I may, Mayor, on the second item, it says a request to amend the standards of the R1MD single-family residential density, medium-density zone district in the general property development and use standards related to parking for single-family residential uses. There will be no motion on that because, as I can understand, we are not amending these standards. Is that right, David? Under the motion that was just passed, we're not amending the standards, so we don't need to follow through with this 9B. Is that right, Scott?
That's correct. There'd be no ordinance amendment required with the approval of the resolution from the previous item.
Okay. And then on this 9C area, a request to provide direction to staff to remove an existing standard requiring that all park and landscape improvements be installed and accepted prior to issuance of 40% of a subdivision tract's building permit. I think that this is just a policy direction, and so I don't know if you need a motion on it. So I think that we're saying, it sounds like the way things are right now, it's working just fine, and there's no need to make that change.
But by adopting the objective standards in 9A, you accomplished what was proposed in 9C.
9C.
So you're good.
Okay, all right. All right, thank you, then I think we're done with this.
And we're done with this item.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Dave. Item 10, consider for the city council to provide direction on how city council meetings will be conducted going forward. And I see, will it be Luke or John?
I'll cover it.
John Hall.
Thank you, Mayor. As we begin to come out of the pandemic, staff is seeking feedback from city council on how city council meetings will be conducted going forward.
I think they should be conducted with the heater on. Freezing in here. Okay, I'm sorry.
It's comfortable in here.
When I see you getting cold, I know it's cold. Okay, please go, I'm sorry, I couldn't resist.
We can adjust that.
No problem.
As you're well aware, the council meetings pre-pandemic were, the audio was recorded, we were not televised, we didn't post anything to the website. Beginning in March and April of last year, we've made significant changes where the video is streamed and recorded. We have the ability of a member of the public to email public comments in, and I do have 3 comments on this item, as well as in person make public comment. The video is posted to the city website. It's streamed on CMAC and YouTube. The video is posted to the city website. And then in addition to it, we do have an interactive portion that somebody can call in, and they can also chat with Carrie. And just a quick shout out, we could not have done the things that we did over the past 15 months without Carrie's lead, in addition to the support from IT. So she dragged me into the 1990s.
John, so she's, while online, she's chatting and doing that?
Correct.
Okay, good. I didn't know that.
So what I'm asking of City Council, and what I'll be looking at meeting with the IT staff and Carrie tomorrow to implement the changes that are going to be required for us to be ready to go for the July 6th meeting. So what I'm asking, and what staff is asking of City Council, is do you guys wish to make any changes to how we're currently conducting the City Council meetings? And realistically, the only challenging thing that Carrie deals with during a meeting is going to be the interactive portion, which somebody has the ability to dial in or chat with Carrie to get online. If we didn't include that, it would be relatively easy because we would basically start the meeting and it would run itself. But the interactive portion does take a little bit of Carrie's time.
Questions?
Question, has the state changed their requirements on council members calling in from a WebEx without having to have the agenda posted at that location? Have those rules changed yet?
Well, okay, so the Brown Act was adjusted to allow us to do anything. He's currently unwinding them, but the specific one that deals with those rules was extended to either September 30 or October 30.
Okay.
So we're still under the old rules. And what I find amazing is going to be the number of cities statewide that have not met in public in 15 months, or they're talking about doing it, and also the number of cities that are talking about continues to work remote full-time. It's just a little bit different from how the city of Clovis has dealt with a pandemic in the city council meetings.
Well, I think we've gotten really good feedback from what we've done through the pandemic, so, I mean, I think that makes sense. I guess I didn't realize it was being streamed on CMAC.
It is.
Live?
It is. YouTube and CMAC.
Really?
In perpetuity.
Uh-oh, I should pay more attention. Anyway, that would be my recommendation. I think people have appreciated the public comment notices, that they like being able to engage. I think that's right. We still don't have 200 people online listening to what we talk about, which would be my goal someday, but I think we should keep doing this.
And I did ask Carrie this morning, like on average, how many people do we have listening to or viewing the city council meeting live? And she indicated probably 12 to 15, half of which are going to be staff members.
Drew?
I think that this has worked well. Looking at the public comments, they've agreed and are encouraging us to stay the course. And when I was the chief of police in Atwater, they televised their meetings, and it did have a kind of a Jerry Springer-esque kind of thing at times, and fortunately, we don't have that. And did you say fortunately? No, unfortunately, we don't have that. And I think that doing it this way permits some of our older citizens and maybe some people who have some mobility issues to be able to participate in the process, have their voice heard, without having to be burdened with leaving their home. And I think that as the technology gets better, we can do even more. I think we stay the course, and then we try to improve it as we go.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna concur with my colleagues on the council. WebEx is a platform that seems to be able to work well for our needs, and the fact that it's streamlined gets more people involved in some of the questions that we have. And maybe there hasn't been anything particularly exciting, but at some point there will be, and it'll open up the conversation to a broader part of our community without them having to be publicly present, which is a good thing. And I don't want to compliment the council on nobody's engaged in grandstanding for the 6 people that are watching, which is a good thing, and I think it's a discipline that we require. And you know what? I say and do stupid things during these council meetings, and I'm going to continue to do that regardless of whether we're on WebEx. I'm not going to change who I am as a council member or as an elected representative, and sometimes my jokes fall flat and maybe sometimes they are offensive, but that is the risk we take by going out and trying to be engaged in our community the way that we are engaged. And so I have no issues with us continuing in this forum.
I was going to ask, is WebEx the platform we want, and have we explored others, and what are the pros and cons? I don't know. I mean, we're not experiencing what the public is experiencing, and how does that work with CMAC and what's the other platform?
YouTube.
YouTube, okay. YouTube, are we doing Facebook Live or all that? Are we going to expand besides?
WebEx has a tremendous amount of possibilities. When we started this a little over a year ago, you'll remember the Zoom issues that were occurring in other cities and stuff. And IT went out and did their homework and recommended this stable platform. Is WebEx, those companies are growing incredibly fast right now with the proliferation of use. WebEx does everything that we need to have done in a secure platform, and we're going to stick with it, but we can take a look at other opportunities too. It works well. We have not received any complaints. Carrie, chime in. Are we missing anything?
No, it's essentially the same as any other platform. It's just the one that we chose to go with because we do use Cisco as a vendor already, and they're secure for us.
Yeah, so as long as they're secure and we're happy with them, and we're getting good feedback from the public, the viewing public, because sometimes I forget that we're actually on, and like Bob says, we act normally, we act the way we are, and we're genuine. We're here just being authentic, and we're
I don't think the kids say that anymore.
and I don't know. It's so I say we keep doing that. Make sure that more people are engaged, and they see how we try to govern Clovis, and they see the faces, our faces, and the faces of those who are the real doers of the real work, our city employees and our city executives that actually do the work. So, yeah. Open this, obviously, all up.
Are you going to move us back to everybody can sit together now?
So that's for the July 6th meeting.
That's exciting.
We have a little bit of, Carrie has quite a setup over there, and we're going to have to figure out going from 4 monitors to 2 monitors and figure out how that works. And we've probably got some wiring to work on. I have a meeting with staff, so hopefully the Tuesday, July 6th meeting will be back to almost normal.
And can CMAQ help with support with that, or
Help us, sorry.
with some support, some helper support, so it's not that?
Our IT staff takes care of that business. And so, and we also hire out, if we need to have
Chad
something
did a
done.
good job, Chad, and who else was there? Andy.
Last Thursday,
On the
Facebook Live.
Facebook Live, that was a good thing. And who was the IT guy?
Chris Cron.
And the PD guy? Ty Woods. They had a whole little studio here, so
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
We actually have a pretty deep base, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, so.
Mayor, can I ask a question of Carrie on this point? So Carrie, you know, the chats that you're engaged in over there, so the chats are generally going to be related to when somebody can be speaking or where they are in the line, or are you guys over there chatting about particular substantive items on the agenda that other people don't get to see?
So typically, our attendees may ask certain questions regarding the item that we're on, and my response is usually you can ask that question directly to council, and I give them the option to speak during the public comments portion of the item. And so I kind of just chat with them and give them direction and instruction on how to mute or unmute and what's going to happen.
Okay.
But usually it's just that I let everyone know every single time the public comments portion is coming up so that they can get ready to speak if they're interested.
All right, so you're just kind of air traffic controlling it sounds like, more than actually engaging in policy questions and answers related to...
Yes, I don't answer any of those questions. I leave it up to council to do that.
Thanks, Gary. Maybe we would sometimes prefer that you answer the questions for us, but...
We have an option, you could answer.
Well, just to give you an example also, is going to be that somebody may come up with a question and Carrie will share my email with them and they'll email me a question and I'll deal with it the following day. And then for the record,
Direction?
I do. Thank you. And for the record, I just want to make sure that I received 3 public comments on item number 10, all in support of us continuing to do the business that we're doing today. So I just want to make sure you had that. And then between now and July 6th, hopefully we'll have this place reconfigured back to where we were. And these desks will be gone and we'll be back to where we were.
Anyone from the public here wanting to comment on this item? Anyone on the web now?
There are none.
Okay. So we'll move on to, what's next? Workshop, yeah. I got 2 screens and none work.
That's what we're going to talk about.
Luke?
So, I've already received some concurrence with one of our recommendations tonight. Wanted to give you a brief background. We're not going to be showing the slides tonight. Everything is continuing as expected. The trends are all good, except for vaccines. We are still lagging in vaccines, although we're actually, Fresno County is ahead of the statewide average as far as cases per 100,000. So things are going well. I'm not going to show those slides. And in fact, at this point, we are rapidly approaching normal, or at least a new normal. Last week, on the 15th, we removed all the mask requirements for vaccinated people, persons visiting the city offices, took down all the stickers. We just have signs on the door saying by entering your attesting that you are vaccinated without a mask. If you're entering without a mask, you're attesting that you've received your vaccinations. And then, fortunately, last week, Cal OSHA adopted regulations that were consistent with the public recommendations and regulations, and the governor signed an executive order making them effective immediately. Usually Cal OSHA regs take 10 days to take effect. So on Friday, those employees that are fully vaccinated no longer have to wear masks or maintain social distancing. So that's all good news. So we really just see kind of a gradual approach toward normal, and my recommendation would be that we remove this item from future agendas. We've had it since March of 2020 when we began our 14-day exercise to flatten the curve. And, we are at the point now where I think if we have something that we do need to come back to council, we'll put it on the agenda. But we probably don't need to have this workshop any longer because things are going to be progressing normally. At a future date, we'll come forward. We're continuing to monitor our existing and ongoing executive orders or emergency orders. And if some of those, we've already retracted several of them. If there's some that need to be changed or retracted, we'll come back as an agendized item. But my recommendation is to no longer do the workshop and continue to move toward normal. So that's my report.
Luke, do you have just off the top of your head what or how many emergency orders we still have in place? I think you're still designated as our emergency person.
Yeah, yes, I'm designated as long as we have a declared emergency, which we have not removed. And part of the reason of keeping that in place is it allows us, when OSHA changes rules, to make an emergency order without going through the meet and confer process and all that. So I'd recommend we don't quite yet remove that emergency declaration and just kind of follow the states. When the state removes theirs, and we remove ours. We probably have, maybe half a dozen existing?
Yeah, maybe 6 to 8 or so that are currently in place, maybe.
A lot of them have to do, and most of those are really all internal, allowing, off the top of my head, I can think of some that have to do with the COVID leave, the requirements that came out from the state and the federal COVID leave requirements. That was done in emergency order so that it doesn't have to go through a meet and confer process. Waiving vacation limits. We have a limit as to how much vacation you can accrue. And when this emergency first hit, we were canceling a lot of vacations because we needed people here. So we waived that limit. And then I think that's built in that once the emergency declaration goes, then they have like 12 months to spin back, to get back down to their accrual limit. Mm-hmm. So there's some internal issues that we still have executive orders on, or emergency orders, but not really any external issues.
Is it fair to say that once our emergency declaration ends, all of those orders are going to expire as well? Because they're all dependent upon the emergency order from the city of Clovis?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, although you've got the business operations one that was discussed, I think, at the last meeting. You extended that one out to October 15th. And that was separate, I guess, from the declared emergency.
Okay. All right.
Of course, you could revisit that. And then I think, as Luke mentioned, some of the internal orders allow for exhaustion of time for a period of time beyond the declared emergency. So even when the declared emergency...
Like 90 days after...
Correct. Then they would still go on by their own terms.
Okay, thanks.
I think another one of those was there were certain entitlements in the development that have a normal timeline, and because we didn't know what to expect when this all hit, that those timelines were basically extended beyond their normal after the end of the emergency. Like instead of something expiring in 6 months, it's going to expire 6 months after the end of the emergency or something to that effect. So those will stay in effect. Those provisions will stay in effect, but everything else would go away.
I have to keep a tally of everything that we've done so far. I can just include it as part of the Friday report.
And the dais will return to normal when?
The next meeting, so July 6th, Scott and I will be at the big kids table again. We'll all be...
The big kids table's right up here. This is for the medium size.
Okay, well, we'll be at the medium size, and then all the big kids will be at the big kids table. Yeah. So anyway, yes, we will go back to everybody sitting in their normal places. With the difference in that we will are working with the technology to have Carrie up there as well, which makes it a little easier when asking, if we have online, you're not having to look around the corner. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
I have a question just from a workforce perspective. So, no masks required if vaccinated, and coming into the building, without a mask, a test that you've been vaccinated. Are you getting any kind of workplace, if I don't want to be vaccinated and someone has to wear a mask, any tension around that? I think workplaces everywhere are trying to deal with, can you require masks? Can you require vaccinations? Maybe not yet. And do people kind of push back, like, well, I don't want you to know whether I'm vaccinated or not? Any of that? chatter in the workplace?
There was a very little bit, actually. I think everybody, kind of accepted the new rules, and the way we put it out is, with the public, and this was the state rules, that you can have the sign up that just says if you enter without a mask, you're attesting that you're vaccinated. The OSHA rules have the word documented in there. The employer must have documented that the employee has a vaccine if they're going to go without a mask. So the employees can voluntarily provide us with a copy of their vaccination card or with an affidavit declaring that they've been vaccinated. And once we have that documentation, then they are free to not wear a mask and to avoid the social distancing. We made it pretty clear in the message that went out that, look, this is a personal choice, and some people have chosen not to be vaccinated, some people cannot be vaccinated for medical reasons, and some people may be vaccinated and still choose to wear a mask. So everybody's following it, and we had really very little kickback on it.
That's good.
Just on a public education thing, at the airport, Wednesday through Sunday through July 25th, from 5 to 10 p.m., they will be they'll be doing vaccinations with all 3 types of vaccines to the public. And they're specifically targeting people coming off planes, coming into the area. But if you're flying out and wanted to get vaccinated, you could. And they're also making a push, especially with our international flights, when you have large families from rural areas coming in. They're making a big push to get those folks vaccinated too. So if citizens were interested and wanted to do it, they could come to the airport and get it done.
That's it? Okay, city manager's comments.
I've got nothing.
Good. Drew, council comments?
Yes, I actually have a photograph.
So, it's catching on, Bob, it's catching.
This is Hendrik Drew Bessinger. He is not quite a week old, and that's my lovely bride. He is teeny tiny. He was a month early, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, so he's actually very small for a Bessinger.
Number 3?
Number 3. This is number 3, but the first male child. So there is another Skywalker. So I'm very happy, and this is I did lobby hard for this child to be named Drew Bessinger. I took one of my campaign signs and I made it, when I was a child they called me Drewzy. So it was Drewzy Bessinger II, Clovis City Council 2055. And it did not work. So anyway, I tried, I did what I could do. So at least I guess a silver medal is not bad. That's all.
Bob?
The world is not ready for a second Drew Bessinger, apparently. The only thing I have to report out is that I'm going to be out for the July 6th meeting, so sorry about that.
Ben?
Just a reminder, I'll be out on July 12th.
I have nothing to report. I'll be here all July. Oh, I do have something. We've had a silky terrier for the last 14 years. And last Sunday was diagnosed with a terminal cancer. So my bride and my daughter take it very bad. So am I. So it's my little buddy. He's not doing very well. So we love our pets, and they're almost our children, and he's not doing so bad. Okay, so that concludes our meeting for today.